All right, welcome. According to the National Restaurant Association, 2020 was the worst year in history for the United States restaurant industry, of course. At the same time, the coronavirus pandemic forced the entire food and beverage service industry to pivot, and then pivot again, and then maybe even pivot once or twice more. But as it turns out, most human beings want to be near other human beings, especially over food and drink. So now, as people get vaccinated, customers are feeling more and more comfortable about being out. And as the whole restaurant industries and bars are beginning to open up for full capacity, we have laid out before us a buffet of trends, troubles, and opportunities. That brings us to today's Zoom-based webinar. Let's Eat: How Restaurants Should Respond as Nighttime Diners Return, brought to you by the all-volunteer nonprofit organization, 24 Hour Dallas. My name is Randall White, and I serve as that organization's board president. Our co-sponsor for this Zoominar is produce wholesaler and food distributor FreshPoint. So before we begin, I would like to thank Shane Lovell, District Sales Manager for FreshPoint, along with our panelists, Ron Ruggles and Matthew Mabel, as well as our guest host, Heather Pickett, Vice President of 24 Hour Dallas's Board of Directors and Vice President for Dallas's premier culinary event venue, 3015 at Trinity Groves. And so now, to introduce our panelists more fully and to moderate today's discussion, here's Heather Pickett.
Well, thank you for that plug, Randall. I appreciate it. I am very much looking forward to today's panel and learning from Ron and Matthew, because I too am in the throes of, we are back in business. Everybody wants to get out. What do we do next? So joining us to share years of expertise are Ron Ruggles. Ron is the senior editor for Informa Connect's Nation's Restaurant News and Restaurant Hospitality. He has been with NRN since 1992. Prior to that, he held a number of roles with the Dallas Times-Herald. He is going to share his expertise today on acquisitions, operations, supply chain, which is something I know we're all excited to hear about, research, development, and then marketing. Joining Ron with all of his insight is going to be Matthew Mabel. Matthew is the founder of Surrender. It's a Texas-based hospitality and management consulting firm that he started in 1991. He focuses on advising restaurateurs how to be more successful, maximize profit, revenue, unit growth, and harmony. They both have seen what we've all faced this year and are going to kind of let us know what are some best practices, how do we grow from here, and then also what are some challenges that we're all going to face. And I, like I said earlier, am all ears. The past 14 months have kind of tested all of our patience, our tolerance, our creativity, no matter what industry you work in. But I think one of the ones that was affected most profoundly is the restaurant and hospitality industry, not only from the physical effects of COVID, but the subsequent economic shutdowns. So now that we're opening back up, gentlemen, I kind of want to start on a positive note and see what are some of the things. I'm tired of the word pivot. I know we all are, but we were one of the first industries to pivot. What were some of the most creative things you saw that were successful and that we can continue to grow upon and expand upon as we all get back into restaurants?
Well, I'll start, Matthew. I refer to Matthew as a source for most of what I know, so thank you for that. I see the past year as pivoting more than a ballet of Swan Lake. It's been amazing what restaurateurs have done. I think the ones that will last are off-premise. I think there are going to be, for a long time, people who are not willing or don't want to eat in a restaurant. It's also cheaper because you have the beverages at home. And patios. I think outdoor dining, just because of the safety, is something that folks from a real estate perspective will be looking for. Matthew is probably much more knowledgeable, so I'll let you go.
Well, thanks, Ron. Appreciate it. Excited to be here with you. So if we had done this webinar 14 months ago, I could never have talked about the touchless ketchup bottle dispenser or the Coca-Cola soda dispenser that I could work from my phone, right? You would have told me I was crazy. But both of those things have been invented in the last 14 months. And that's just indicative of all the new things that we've had to do, from slimming our menus down to meal kits, to go, to curbside, to front end software so our guests can order on our websites and pay on our websites and never speak to us. Technology, technology, technology. It's changed the way we think about what business we're in. You know, we kind of laughed when Domino's said they're a technology company, no longer a restaurant company, and we're not laughing anymore. So there's been so much we've had to do, including really relying on our culture to keep our employees engaged on board during a crisis when they found out that they were essential workers, something they never knew before. So it's been an incredible time of creativity. And I agree with Ron, that does not end now. The need for creativity is not over. If you think it's over, you haven't learned the great lessons that you could have learned in the last 14 months that are going to help you for the rest of your career.
So Texas is one of the first states that's reopened. We're allowed 100% capacity in our restaurants. Not everyone has jumped straight into 100% capacity for a myriad of reasons. What are some of the things that you see are going to be the most significant challenges to our restaurant operators as they meet this new, as they start to have more people in the restaurants?
Two things come top of mind: labor, which is tough for everybody right now, and supply chain, which indirectly leads to the labor shortage because a lot of food processors and drivers can't find people to get food out. I think those are two big problems that folks are going to face, as well as consumer hesitancy to return to the environment. I, for one, am not returning immediately to an indoor situation because I am fully vaccinated 2 times with Pfizer, but I don't want to put myself in a stew of virus because a lot of people, 50% of the population, is not vaccinated.
So I'm going to echo that with the number one and number two. Labor, number one. I have a group that I work with at one of their units. They could only spend 2/3 of their labor budget. And normally they think, wow, awesome, we're making bonus. We got labor down by 30%. But in this environment, it was a tragedy because they could not get enough staff on the floor to serve the number of guests that wanted to come in the restaurant. So that labor is a huge thing. There's a couple sides to that. We can debate the whys all we want, but that's really not going to help us today. It's more about what action we can take today. And the action we can take today is love the employees we have now through our culture, through giving them flexible scheduling if they need it. It's because it's one thing to be challenged in hiring people, but if you don't lose people, you don't have to hire any people. And then every little crazy thing you can think of to recruit, enroll through technology, through bounties and signing bonuses, anything you've got. And along with your cultural compelling argument about why it's better to work for you than the restaurant across the street is going to be critical in this labor shortage. And this labor shortage is not a temporary thing. If you talk to your friends in manufacturing or logistics or distribution, or even the third-party delivery companies are having trouble getting drivers to bring our food to people's homes. So we're going to have to continue to innovate in that. And commodity prices, I have a client on Friday, we figured out that if we want to charge our regular margin for 4 slices of bacon, we should charge $10 for that bacon, right? That's insane. It's so far out of what the guest can handle. So we're going to continue to see this commodity pressure. The stories are interesting. We know that the top cuts of meat are mostly consumed in restaurants. So last year, when the restaurants were closed, what did they do? They thinned the herd. Okay. Well, you can't make a cow in 24 hours and slaughter it and ship it just because the governors decided to open up restaurants. So we've got a shortage of supply for protein. We've got corn. When I grew up, I never thought I'd tell you what a bushel of corn would cost. That was not in my lexicon, but it doubled last year to $6.50. Okay. And what that means is, well, who eats corn? Everything on your plate ate corn to get to your plate. So we're going to have to continue to deal with that. So I have if you're listening to me, whether live or on a recording, I have one thing I want you to do when you hang up from this Zoom is raise your prices now. You've got to raise your prices now. The guest is on a honeymoon. It's an awesome time to do it. If you haven't raised your prices in a while, you've got to raise them, because there's only one person that pays for anything in a restaurant, and that's the guest. So absolutely, labor and commodities are number 1 and 2. I think number 3 is reconnecting with the guest. The guest has segmented itself in the last year. As Ron stated, you've got the people that are comfortable in restaurants, that are just now ready and still not coming. And you have to understand the guest behavior in all 3 of those categories. This actually makes your life easier. And we're going to come back to that later on in this webinar, because 1 + 1 = 3. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes.
Ron, do you have anything to share about how you think we can recruit or keep our current employees, and then also addressing what Matthew said about raising prices to address the other issues? Anything you're seeing locally, nationally?
Nationally, let me add to what Matthew said. Just last week, Texas Roadhouse, popular dinner-only steak concept, did 2 things. They did it earlier, but they extended their hours from opening at 4 to opening at 3 p.m. to accommodate more guests with less staff. And 2, they raised their menu prices last week 1.4%. It's the perfect time to raise those prices because the consumer has some goodwill toward the industry and is willing to eat that. They've also been paying delivery charges, which are 30% of meals price, so they're a little more accustomed to higher pricing. And as far as getting labor back in, it's going to be a challenge. Just this morning, I got information from a survey taken last week by Black Box, which is the analytics for the restaurant industry. And they said higher pay and better quality of life. They consider, 34% of them consider that the biggest challenge to getting labor in the door. They also mentioned unemployment. I personally think unemployment is a bugbear, a straw man. I just think it's an excuse at this point. I think you've got to have a culture to get people in.
And let me jump back in on that. I totally agree. One of the reasons to raise prices is to see how much you can pay your people and still get a good return on capital. We all went to economics class and we all understand supply and demand. So we've got to stretch wages, but wages, everybody's got money. And people call me every day and they go, hey, my competitor across the street is paying $1 more. They're paying a cash bonus. They're paying this, paying that. Wages are important, but to have a culture and have that compelling reason why they should pick you is huge. It used to be culture was for the guest, to enroll the guest. And now culture is to enroll the guest and the employee.
I like that. I'll keep that one in mind. Earlier, you both spoke about to-go and how off-premise has become so important to us. And Ron, you said yourself, you're not ready to go back in. Do we think that to-go sales and curbside are going to continue to grow? And how do people best capture that?
I don't think it'll continue to grow because a lot of, especially casual dining, full service places were at 100% during the depth of the pandemic. So that's leveled off between 20 and 30% for a lot of operators. I think they're going to be able to capture a lot of that, and they've done it through various ways, setting up drive-through windows, not necessarily like for a fast food restaurant, but designated parking spaces that are for curbside or delivery pickup, or people just to quick get in and out if they want it. I think you're going to see those stay. I just think you've got to be in the mindset that the consumer has been spent 14 months doing nothing but Amazon and DoorDash. They're going to embrace a lot of that convenience going forward. And I think every restaurant operator has to be in that mindset. How do I make my food as convenient as possible for the person, whether they're dining in, eating on the patio, doing curbside, doing pickup, doing third-party delivery or other delivery? you just got to think, how convenient can I be for the consumer?
Well, I mean, that's a great formula. Most of my clients are at 110 to 120% of where their revenue was in this time at the beginning of May in 2019. And that really feels good considering last May, we were at 40% of revenue. So how did they do that? Well, the way they do that is opening up their dining rooms and greeting people they haven't seen in a year and continuing to go curbside and delivery, which is a huge gift going forward for our industry. We've created a new guest that really likes the convenience of curbside, that likes to go on the website and talk to no one and enter their credit card and open up their trunk and get their dinner put in their trunk and eat it in the comfort of their own home, in their pajamas, watching TV. This is great for them. So this is one of the gifts of the pandemic, is that we have a new channel. So Chipotle reports that their digital channels are up 174% over pre-pandemic. Wow. But here's something else that they report. As their dining rooms have opened up, this has not cannibalized their dining client. So they've created a new guest. And that's an example of what I believe everybody ought to be doing. So my rule of thumb is, as you open up, when you reach 100%, whether you're watching this here in Dallas, around Texas, where we're at 100%, or in a state where that hasn't happened yet, a healthy restaurant will now have to go and curbside and delivery 10 points higher than they did coming into the pandemic. And that's where 1 and 1 is 3. Because all of a sudden, even though you might have hated it, I mean, I know people that didn't even want to take a to-go order because it interrupted production before March of last year. But it is a huge opportunity that you're going to be able to use for the rest of your business life to increase your revenue. So yeah, there's a guest, and that's not going away.
Do you have any thoughts on how we get people that are a little bit timid to go back into the restaurant? How do we entice some of them to come back? Do we tell people how we're cleaning the restaurants, things like that? Or do we just keep going down the path and, like you said, focus on this new guest that doesn't have to leave their house, speak to anybody, wash their hair, any of those things, to eat your delicious dinner?
That's a tough one. I think visible cleaning protocols have now become table stakes in the restaurant industry. I think you've got to have those no matter what. I want to see people wipe down the table as I'm coming to be seated. I do think there is going to be some pushback until the vaccination rates get towards 70%, 80%. I think there are people that are educated consumers who are going to be hesitant to dive into that pool, literally and figuratively.
Right. So here's something that's interesting. There's a guest that's emerged in the last month or two that is now willing to order a third-party delivery that hasn't eaten a restaurant meal in a year because they misunderstood that it was a foodborne illness, or maybe they had an excessive risk factor in their household, and they didn't even want our food to come in the front door. Mm-hmm. So we've got all the way from the people that are so excited to be back to people that just now have eaten their first restaurant food in a year. And, we spent our whole lives not talking about sanitation because, it's a 30, 60, or 90-minute vacation when you come to our restaurants. And the last thing people want to talk about is sanitation. And the truth is, until this happened, most of our guests thought we were just one step ahead of the health inspector anyway. They never knew all the work we do in sanitation, HACCP, food safety, all the education we give our employees, and some things we do every day for the simple reason of we want to make sure that no one ever gets sick in our restaurants because we care about them and because of the economic risk. So that's now turned around permanently. People do not want to touch stuff anymore, right? That touchless ketchup bottle is not going away. So now we have to make a show of sanitation. We have to be willing to talk about it. All the data shows that cleanliness and sanitation has risen substantially on the guest criteria for evaluating a restaurant. And whether that's a guest that's come in for the first time in a year and is looking around, wondering if it's okay, or it's communicating with that guest that just now started ordering restaurant food, This is permanent. This is not going to change. And, you know, I hear what Ron is saying about herd immunity, but, you know, we're starting to hear we may never get to herd immunity. There was a big story in the front page of the New York Times today that said at the rate of adoption of vaccines, herd immunity is now a dream. So that's only going to reinforce the need for us to keep our restaurants looking clean everywhere we can. So what the best restaurant operators have been doing, and is they've been walking through their restaurants through the front door, pretending that they haven't been there in a year, instead of blowing by the hostess stand like they usually do, looking around. One of my clients said, man, I am so thankful you asked me to do that. They've been cleaning my kitchen for a week. So yeah, absolutely. This guest is going to be timid for a while.
And Matthew mentioned technology, which I think is one of the things that folks can lean into to provide that level of comfort. QR codes for menus, which became widespread for dining, and especially in casual dining during the pandemic. I think they're here to stay. Not only do they save the operator money in printing menus, but they can change prices quickly and change the menu quickly if they have a supply chain problem. So QR menus, you don't have to touch one also. Mm-hmm. And I was just at BJ's in Addison the other night, and I paid my check by doing the QR code at my table, putting in my table number. The check, everything I'd ordered was on my phone, which I don't mind touching because it's been in my pocket. Only my germs, my cooties are the only ones I have to deal with. And I paid it with my credit card on my phone, which, if you've seen some of the check presenters in local and national restaurants, I'm not sure I want to ever touch one again.
So Heather, here's something to think about. On top of that, we have now 3 segments of guests. We used to have 1 that we really thought about. We have what I call the O-boys. The O-boys are like, hey, fantastic, we can do anything we want. Right? They're the people that have been really wanting to be out. Maybe they haven't been too happy about having to wear their masks. Then we have the okays, which is, okay, I'm back. Let me look around. And then we have the people like the timid, the unready. Okay, now I'm ready to order delivery because I'm hungry. I'm tired of my own food. And that is another gift, just like curbside is another gift. Mm-hmm. If we understand that we now have 3 segments of guests, and we can reach out to each of those segments in different ways and understand this new guest behavior, which I'd love to tell you what the new guest behavior is going to be, but nobody knows. We speculate. But any good operator is going to understand how to address the O-boys, the okays, and the timids, unreadies, and tailor a message to each one of them. Tailor a message when you're talking to them. Tailor your social media messages individually. This is a huge opportunity to understand our guests that we've never had in our industry before.
And Matthew, I think those could actually extend to your potential employees as well.
Yes.
I think you've got the same 3 categories of potential employees, and you've got to figure out ways to make them feel comfortable in order to help alleviate the labor shortage.
Yeah, good point.
I like that. You spoke briefly earlier about a honeymoon period. As everybody's returning, how do we capitalize on that? And you mentioned raising prices. What else can we as operators do during this honeymoon period to celebrate that people are coming back and share our happiness with them, but then also to capitalize on it so that we can then continue growth?
Menu reduction, I think, is one area that you can reduce food wastes. You can make it easier on your staff for prep. And I think the consumer is not expecting your full menu. Unless maybe if you're Cheesecake Factory, and even I think they've trimmed a few of their items. So I do think that those are areas where you can really play a little bit, make it easier on your staff, yourself, as well as the guest probably won't mind and won't care.
So all you people out there in Zoom land, raise your Zoom hand if you've ever been on a honeymoon before. Okay, a lot of us have been on honeymoons, and it's something we know about those honeymoons. They're temporary. They don't last forever. So one, enjoy it while you can. Your guest is going to be much more tolerant because they're just so happy to be back with their friends. And let me tell you, that's not going to last long. That's going to last weeks or months, when all of a sudden they're going to wake up and they're going to be demanding again. So enjoy it while you can, celebrate with them. The employees that you have should feel very positive about revenue coming in the door, but realize that this is a temporary condition. And what you learned during the pandemic, I mean, there used to be a bumper sticker and it said, Lord, give me one more oil boom and I promise not to screw it up. Well, that's us today. We have a tremendous opportunity coming up in the next few years of the restaurant business. We have a great economy coming. We have people that think about us in a more excited way than they did before because they lost us for a while. So what that means is going back to the fundamentals, and what the smartest operators are doing, what I'm telling my clients to be doing is, while we're enjoying this honeymoon, let's make sure that we've got our fundamentals on our management and our operations and our service and our marketing and our culture right. All the work we put in on them during the pandemic, and continue to put that work in on them, because we want to be the winners when the honeymoon is over and some of our competitors are gone.
And I would contend the honeymoon is going to be shorter than most marital honeymoons, because I'm already starting to see snark in social media from people's expectations of having food delivered to their home where they have the dishes and everything, is now extending to what they're experiencing in the restaurant. So I do think the honeymoon is going to be shorter than we expect.
It's the ultimate LTO, let me tell you.
Do you have any thoughts on what we do as we encounter that snark?
I'd say own it. You know, I think that's one thing, the part of forgiveness on the part of the consumer right now is they understand everybody is under pressure. And just say, I hear you, we'll do what we can, we're addressing it, and then move on.
Right, and let me echo that. You know, we all have had these challenges with guests that are waiting to eat in our restaurants and see empty tables because of our staffing levels. And at first, and there's a lot of social media on that too, where the guests are saying, what's wrong with these idiot restaurateurs? Why don't they just hire people? You know, as if we can just manufacture them out of some kind of 3D printer and put them out there. So here's a couple of things not to do. Don't discuss unemployment and Federal Reserve policy with your guests. Once again, they're coming for a 30, 60, 90-minute vacation. But one thing you can reflect back to your guest is you only want to sit them down when you can give them the level of service and quality that they expect from your heart, because no one's going to argue with that. They're going to understand that. And if you have a guest that you want to save, because guests have a habit of going to other restaurants if they can't get into yours, and sometimes they like them. So in an extreme case, in a weekend, give the guest a small gift card to come back during the week when you can serve them, and make sure they know how sincere you are about wanting to give them the experience that your reputation demands.
And that's where you get to helping solve the problem, extending your hours to an earlier afternoon. It just spreads out the potential for having a bad experience. Pent-up demand is there. I think everybody's going to see it. I think everybody is somewhat intoxicated by all these people that are willing to come in the door. But if you can't treat them right, they're going to live with a bad experience and tell their friends for a long time.
That's true. I think that gift card idea can go a long way. I appreciate all of that. We already have a number of questions.
Great.
Our audience, so I wanted to kind of get to those. One question that somebody's asked and they would like you to both share your thoughts on is the ghost kitchen. One of the things that kind of came out of this pandemic are ghost kitchens. They want to know, do you think these are going to stay around? Are they going to impact freestanding restaurants?
I think you've seen a lot of freestanding restaurants invent their own ghost kitchens to use excess capacity in their own kitchens. Mm-hmm. So I think you will see them. I think ghost kitchens by themselves or as a standalone brand are going to have difficulty in the years ahead, because it costs a lot to have a brand like that and everything that goes with it. So I think if you're using it wisely, using excess capacity, excess labor that you might have in your kitchen to accommodate that delivery channel, fine. But I think the boom in everybody and their dog doing a ghost kitchen, I think that dog don't hunt anymore.
So I have a couple of groups I work with that are doing virtual or ghost, and we've learned a lot in the last year about that. And what we've learned is it's a nice way to supplement a business that's already successful. So if you can run 2,000-3,000 a week out of a unit on your virtual brand on top of your existing revenue, and you have 5 or 10 restaurants, that starts to add up, right? It's just math. If you can run 3,000 a week out of 10 restaurants, that's a $1.5 million business. So we're learning where in incremental phases, it can be a good thing, like third-party delivery was before the pandemic, when it added some profit and cash flow to a successful business. So that's been a good information. And we're learning that the guest will order from us sight unseen. There's a guest that'll scroll and they'll see a brand they've never heard of and they'll go, well, let's try it. So we've got to deliver once that happens.
And I think that category of ghost kitchens is going to see increasing pressure from celebrity ghost kitchens that have a lot of built-in brand equity already. Social media influencers like Mr. Beast Burgers or whatever that came up with.
Right. Yeah.
I just think you're going to have, I don't know if independent operators have the marketing muscle to put behind creating a big name ghost kitchen that will show up on third-party delivery marketplaces.
Right. And with that in mind, what they can do, though, is they can license at a very relatively low cost a brand and pay a royalty and what is essentially a pretty low upfront fee and experiment with it. I mean, it's an easy thing to test. You know, you put it in a unit or 2 units, you give it a couple months and you see what happens. So a lot of these brands are licensing with very low upfront fees. They may be trying to sell you their ingredients to make money, but that is certainly something to consider if you've got the bandwidth for another aspect of your business.
Thank you. All right, we have another question. It says, for those vendors that are not direct suppliers of goods and services, they're saying specifically ancillary services, insurance, mystery shop surveys, pest control, security, that had to close as well when the restaurants were closed down. What do you see as the impetus for restaurant owners to return? Is there a timing or revenue line that they must cross to reinitiate these services full time? I know for us, insurance never wavered and pest control never wavered. I don't know what you saw for other people. And as far as some of those extras.
I think folks like until things start to stabilize, and I think it's going to be another year before we see a lot of stabilization in the industry. Those niceties, the fluff at the edges, like mystery shoppers, I think folks are going to be trimming those out of their P&Ls. I think there's so many unknowns coming back into the vaccine era that a wise operator will be very careful about spending anything that doesn't directly impact the top line. Matthew might.
So your insurance people never go away, even when you want them to. But what you said, your insurance is tied to your revenue. And so that means that if you haven't done it already, well, you have by now, years gone by. But this time last year, I was saying, call your insurance agent, tell them what your revenue is going to be, and they'll drop your premiums, right? Same thing with your workers' comp. Awesome. So that's an issue. But yes, I think people did cut some of those frills. They cut mystery shops. I don't know anybody that cut out the exterminator. Honestly, we're in Texas, man. I'm seeing some of that mystery shopping coming back because we need the data to understand how we're doing with the guest now that the guest is back. But one of the biggest things they cut was supervision. So that's a real change in the industry. It's really hard to find a restaurant manager. It's brutally hard to find an employee, but a multi-unit supervisor, hey, there's a bus full of them outside that got downsized. And we see that in every downturn. This is my 5th downturn. And all of a sudden they figure out, well, one district person can look after 8 or 9 restaurants instead of 5 or 6 restaurants. And that goes on for a while. So the biggest savings, I think, has been corporate overhead. And now we're coming back. They're thinking, well, do we really need to rehire those people that we had to let go, even though we loved them and they served us well and we gave them a fair severance package? Do we really need to hire those people back? And in many cases, they're not going to do that. They're just not bringing them back.
All right. All right. Our last question that's come in so far. Due to herd immunity being a dream, as you mentioned, and we keep seeing on the news how the demand for vaccines is dropping, do you envision restaurants making a policy to not ever allow employees and guests to enter space without vaccine or proof of vaccination?
Vaccine passports. Boy, there's a hot, sticky wicket. I do not think American consumers are going to embrace that idea robustly. I think there is a lot of pushback already, and it's just in the talking stages. European restaurants, I think, have been able to implement it. The EU is way ahead of the game on providing some specificity on what a vaccine passport will look like. I just think there's such pushback on getting the vaccine point blank in the US that I think there's going to be difficulty in providing something like that in the US.
So I had a conversation yesterday with somebody. I don't know if you've seen the story this weekend about the school in Miami that does not allow its educators to be vaccinated. And if they are vaccinated, they will be terminated. Not sure that's legal, but that's what they do. So I mentioned that to somebody yesterday and I said, well, there are all these companies where you have to get vaccinated to work there. And I asked them, can you name me one? I think a few months ago, we expected there would be places where you had to be vaccinated to work. And as it's rolled out, that just doesn't exist. So we're going to be dealing with this for a long time for many reasons. It's going to ebb and flow. It is our hope that based on everybody's practices, whether they be vaccinated or masked or just washing their hands and being careful, that we can get the caseload down to a manageable number. And we're going to be living with this for a while. That's what I said. Nobody's going to want to touch something ever again in your restaurant, period. So what the restaurants are doing, because most operators feel like they can't tell their employees to get vaccinated, but they want their employees to vaccinate. I'm saying most operators before, you start flaming me out there. They're offering paid time off to get your vaccination, which now they can get a tax credit for, or they might be offering a small incentive. You get vaccinated, we'll put $50 on your paycheck, because they feel that's a good thing to be able to tell their guests, my staff's vaccinated. But as far as whether or not you can come in with the vaccine passport, I mean, I used to be in the nightclub business in the days when you could forge a driver's license, right? Look, you know how easy it is, that little card we all got? Those of us that have been vaccinated, I could have 40 of them ready for you in 5:15 after we finish this webinar. I just don't see that that's coming. I don't want to get on a cruise ship with a bunch of people that aren't vaccinated for a week when I can't get off, right? I don't. But a restaurant, I think we're going to be okay there.
I'm going to jump in with a question if I can, Heather. Ron and Matthew, the restaurants are not standalone in coming back to the nighttime economy, which is the 24-hour Dallas's focus and mission. Restaurants do not stand alone in this ecosystem that supports a lot of different industries. The arts, music, concerts, theater, dance, festivals. It's part of a thing. Transportation, nighttime transportation, the employees that want to get off work and don't want to have to drive home might want to get on light rail. So this involves a lot of opportunities for policy changes. One of the policy changes we have seen are parklets, and how governments have decided that they're going to look the other way, or they're going to create systems by which restaurants can expand out into the public realm, as they say, in ways that they hadn't done before. but how else can policymakers at the local level, municipal level, also help our restaurants get their footing back and thrive again?
Well, one of the areas I think is providing outdoor seating in public spaces, sidewalks, bike or bus lanes, whatever. I think it's very European. I think the more that the city thinks about, less about traffic and more about pedestrians, I think it would be very beneficial. I don't know if that'll happen. There was some of that early on in the pandemic where the city was much more amenable to providing licensing and I guess what parking balances, whatever. But I do think if that would continue, that would be very beneficial for the industry, especially at nighttime. When it's cooler in Texas in the summer, it might be a positive.
Yeah, I mean, Randall, that's a great question, and it's a tough question. I know it's something you think about all the time, and you and I talked about this, the intertwining of this nighttime economy when we were working on that together a few years ago. So it's a huge challenge because government has influence, but government does not have the say. So we know in Dallas, we had our first symphony concert in the United States, I think, at the Symphony Hall in Dallas this weekend, and I believe it was 500 capacity, right? So how many of those people went to dinner before the symphony like they used to? I mean, I don't know, but I sure would like to find out. So it's talking about those things and encouraging as concert halls open and movie theaters open and all those places that had to be shut down open, trying to encourage this slow opening process where we can get a grasp about what's really good for people. Something that I would be in favor of. And also, I understand has huge political resistance. I mean, we have our baseball stadium here, where we were the first baseball stadium to open to full capacity, which is good if you own a baseball team and probably good if you don't care and you're a baseball fan, but probably not good for the hesitant guests that we want to come out, because ultimately it's about economic growth. It's about making people feel safe and comfortable. So we have to have that conversation. That's a huge ask for local government. But, of all the people that are in our restaurants this weekend and next weekend, a lot of them were in the habit of going to a second or third place in their night, or the fact that they went to the second or third place generated that restaurant meal. And I think it's going to be a while before we get back into that kind of vibrancy. And that's what really makes our nighttime economy tick.
And if it's purely anecdotal, but I went to a Rangers game on Wednesday night. They asked everybody to wear a mask. Maybe 5% of the people were wearing a mask. Maybe half of those were wearing them incorrectly. I've seen more noses during the pandemic than I care to even talk about. And I did not feel entirely comfortable in that environment. And I'm an fairly educated but skeptical consumer. I think it's going to be a slow comeback because of behavior, basically.
I want to ask one other question though. Ron, you mentioned this before we opened up, and it goes back to the labor issue, and Matt probably can add to this as well. You women back in the workforce because of the burden of homeschooling. Talk about that.
I would expand that to any single parent, because there are men who are single parents as well. But until there is safety in daycare, and it's widely available again, and schooling, safety and widely available again, that entire group of single parents is going to have difficulty getting back into the workforce. And it's especially burdensome for women who generally have much of the childcare responsibility. So I think until there's something decided about or to help out with childcare, which I believe was part of the most recent COVID package, some funding for that, but I think that would help get people back into the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, we have an unusually different view from Dallas. My daughter's in DISD. We went back to school in October. We went to a full school day just a month ago. We had a 5, 6 of a school day. But you have friends around the country, they've still got 3 kids in different rooms on their laptops, and they've been there for over a year. So here it's less of an issue than it is in other places, but I agree with what Ron said. You have to think through where people are going to put their kids to get them to come back to work. And that is part of our labor problem. There's no question. I mean, our labor problem is multifaceted, but that is sort of one aspect of it. And that's what to do with the kids. And summer's coming too, so school's out.
Also, Matthew mentioned earlier that it was a good time for restaurateurs or any, this would be nightlife business as well, to reconsider how you're approaching what you've done in the past. And just today, 11 Madison Park, one of the top restaurants in New York City, the chef owner said that they are changing their entire format. They're getting rid of all meat proteins, meats, and just going vegetarian. No meat products, no eggs, no cheese. So it is a good time. This does provide operators of any sort of business a real luxury of recasting yourself as something you maybe want to be or have considered or learned during the pandemic to how to appeal to an audience.
What's the new thing? Is that part of the new kind of thing we're going to see, the new dining experience? Is it going to be that level of innovation going to keep up? Am I going to go to some familiar restaurant, a friend of mine, over here, and suddenly it's going to be a very new experience because they have learned so much, or they've had to innovate because of the supply chain issues, et cetera, et cetera? Are we really in for a new era?
Well, I think that everyone has learned a couple of things in the last year. One, to make decisions quickly through changing circumstances, and 2, to try things and see what works and then go back and stick with what works. So that coupled with a booming economy ought to mean we have a really good time ahead of us. I really think that this is a huge, huge opportunity. And there's a journalist, not Ron, there's a journalist that used to call me up every December and ask me what the big trends were that year. And this is finally, I told him to stop calling me because the only trend is that there's multiple trends, right? There's such segmentation in our industry that it allows something like, that's been an incredible story that Ron wrote about today about 11 Madison Park. Unthinkable, before. So that means that there's so many trends that the guest is interested in, and the guest has such a focus on what's going on in your restaurants from a culinary standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint, from a social standpoint, from a social responsibility standpoint, from an aspirational standpoint. There's a ton of opportunity out there. And there's no better time to offer a guest something that you haven't tried before than when they're really excited about restaurants and it's not just the routine we're going out. So there's huge opportunity out there.
Is it still a good time, though? Typically, we find, particularly among persons of color, that the nighttime restaurant launch or the small mom and pop shop opening something, starting a new business, whether it's even catering or other food service kind of operation delivery, is it still a time for entrepreneurship? I mean, are people going to pull back up on saying, hey, I want to get into this profession as a chef or as a caterer or as a restaurant owner? Are we still, or are people going to be cautious for a while?
Well, my own feeling is the investors will probably still have that entrepreneurial spirit and want to do something. I just think they can't be following the pack. They've got to be offering something special that will stand apart from that sea of sameness that so much of the industry had become accustomed to. I think maybe it was a lot of it was caution. A lot of it was there was private equity money providing growth for segments. I think some of that private equity money is going to be going into acquisitions of things that are already successful. But I do think there'll always be room for new ideas. And I think 11 Madison Park is probably one of the fresher ones. I don't know if it'll work. I personally am skeptical that anybody will pay what, $350, $500 for a vegetarian 12-course meal, but it's a big market.
So I want to tell you a secret. It's never a good time for a chef that wants to start a restaurant that's undercapitalized and has a big idea. Now that I never want to step on anybody's dreams, but it's a low barrier to entry in our business, and it always looks like it's easier than it is. And if you're watching this and you got ideas, I encourage that, but I encourage you to get involved with people in the industry that have had success to understand what the risk factors are. I mean, my practice, I only work with successful restaurateurs, so I'm kind of biased. And having said that, for successful restaurateurs, I think it will be a good time to innovate because they've already got a foundation to build on. And that's this 11 Madison Park thing that's super fresh. And I've seen some vegetarian tasting menus. Some of my clients have them. I don't know if I'd build a whole business on them, but it's a good option. So that's something to watch. But if you're thinking about starting a restaurant, I don't want to puncture your dream, but I always want you to be realistic, because if you segment the business into the people that have been successful continually and the people that are getting into the business, most of the attrition is with people getting into the business and not with the people that have been doing it their whole lives.
And then I'm going to ask one more question, and then Heather, Ron, Matthew, whatever you want to say to wrap up. Technology, you touched on it a bit. We touched on it in terms of COVID concerns, but we were already heading towards a place where technology was beginning to kind of replace personnel. And because you didn't have to pay Social Security for a computer or a kiosk, is technology going to continue to advance regardless of the concerns of the pandemic?
I would say yes, Randall, but I don't think you're going to have robots preparing your food and serving it to you. I think there's going to be around the edges, forecasting, supply chain. I think a lot of technology can be put to use, buying, procurement. There are a lot of areas that technology will be helping out and reducing corporate staffs, but I think hospitality is still people. I think Matthew would agree with me. It used to be called high touch, but no, it's somewhat touchy at this point. I think people preparing your food and sharing their dining rooms or even their drive-thrus with you is going to be maintained in this industry. I'll let Matthew.
So I would concur with that. I think AI will, maybe augmenting your accounting department at some point or your reservation book. But the big change in technology in the last year was that obviously the chains had more resources than the independents. So the chains did incredible things in technology. The independents woke up to needing more technology, and then 3 categories for the guest, in the restaurant, and in the office. So what my clients are doing, and what I'm telling clients for the first time, is you've got to have a technology plan in your business, and someone's got to own it. And that is where you have somebody in your organization that keeps up to date on all the new technological advances that you can use, prioritizes them, pitches them to the different departments in the organization, and you schedule them over time because you can't do everything at once. There was a dream, if you go back 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and let's say you might pick up Nation's Restaurant News and read a story about technology convergence. Okay, that was the dream, that one segment of the business would bring you everything. Maybe it was your POS vendor, maybe it was your accounting software vendor, and you'd have to go one place for everything. Well, that dream has faded. It's not happened. We don't know why it hasn't happened. That's for some other webinar. But you have to buy all these things piecemeal. You can implement them all, but you also can't afford to fall behind because you have to keep up as best you can with what the chains are able to do.
Okay.
And that's where I think the ghost kitchen idea comes in, because they have teams that take care of a lot of that tech stack for you. Mm-hmm. And you just provide the manufacturing facility for the food.
Heather, any last words for this audience as we're looking at what's next with this?
No, I think our panelists covered it all very well. I think everybody is going to walk away with some new ideas. Thank you both. I know I have. And we're all going to see how long this honeymoon period lasts. I hope we get a few more days out of it.
Ron or Matthew, any final words for the people dialed in?
Yeah, I will come to your house and throw rice for the honeymoon. That's all I've got.
So I want to say one thing about technology. I mean, we use a lot of AI in our office for recording transcripts of meetings, and we've learned that AI does not know what queso is. What? And there's some other things it doesn't know what is that I will not talk about in a family viewing webinar. So if it doesn't know what queso is, how in the heck is it going to run the business? Anyway, I would like to, if you're watching this, to encourage you to take advantage of this huge opportunity that's in front of you. We've all outlined some aspects of what it's going to look like going forward. And of course, anybody is welcome to get in touch with me through my website with any questions they were too ashamed to answer in a public forum.
Well, that's terrific. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at the clock. We're about to come to the end of this program. I would like to thank our panelists, restaurant journalist Ron Ruggles of Nation's Restaurant News, where it sounds like we all need to go there now and read the story today about the restaurant in Manhattan. Restaurant consultant Matthew Mabel of Surrender Inc. You can go to his website and contact him, as he said he told you to. And then also thanks to Heather Pickett of 3015 at Trinity Groves for being our guest host. One more time, I'd like to share our appreciation with FreshPoint for co-sponsoring this program. By Wednesday, a video of this Zoominar will be parked on the 24-Hour Dallas website and also on our YouTube channel. I do want to give you a heads up. Some of our people in Dallas are very intrigued by this next Zoominar, and I'm really excited to be the one. It's going to be one-on-one, one host, one panelist. Our next Zoominar will be Tuesday, June 22nd at 4 p.m. Central Time for our folks that dial in from around the planet. We're going to explore ideas for a safer, more respectful, and more sociable Dallas at night. But our panelist will be the Dallas's new chief of police, Eddie Garcia. And you can register for one of the 100 seats available for that Zoominar right now. You can go to 24hourdallas.org. Chief Garcia, I'm very excited the fact that he is willing to sit down with us and talk about this. There are some new innovative practices that are proactive rather than reactive that will benefit our entire nighttime industries. Arts, culture, festivals, restaurants, hotels. There's new thinking that we'll be talking about on Tuesday, June 22nd, 4 p.m. Everyone involved in 24-Hour Dallas is a volunteer. We're here because we believe that Dallas can provide even more positive, respectful, and rewarding experiences at night. Our volunteer teams are currently focused on culture, nighttime placemaking, safety, racial equity, placemaking at night, communications and economics. We have some big things up our sleeves. We invite you to learn more about us, support us, or become involved at 24hourdallas.org. And finally, Vincent van Gogh wrote, "The night is more alive and more richly colored than the day." So may all your night skies be full of stars. My name is Randall White. Thank you for joining us. Lady and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, Randall.
Bye.
Enjoyed it.